It's time for Casey at night. Yes! It's my favorite day of the week, and it's my favorite thing to do, which is to share my little naughty bedtime stories with you. So just give me a second while I get myself all organized here. And first, I want to thank you and welcome you to another edition of Casey at Night. I want to, before we get too far, I want to say thank you to Lusciously for our story from last week, which was Ready for My Close-Up, room 222. That was a lot of fun, a little bit of urban life, urban love, as she describes it. If you recall, there was a little midday afternoon delight, and it had a little bit of voyeurism, little peekaboo from the hallway, which kind of, I think for some of us, would make the experience rather hot. The video was currently posted, and of course, as always, when this airing is done, I will be pinning this video to my timeline. The other video will be available in my moments. It'll be available on my websites. But again, thank you to Lusciously for Ready for My Close-Up, room 222, Urban Life, Urban Love. If I got that out of order, please forgive me, Lusciously, but those are all the words folks need to find you. As for me, you might have noticed that I have been promoting my most recent release. Finally, I know I haven't released anything in a minute, and that's because I've been spending a lot of time just getting to know all of you. So I just recently released a short called Secrets. It is the first girl on girl story, if you will. Well, let's just leave it at it. It's, as I described it, it's a story about what happens when the past collides with the future. Collides with the present. How does it affect the future? And right now, the first, because it's going to be, I haven't decided if it's going to be 3 or 4 parts, but the first part is just the setup. It's the how these two characters meet, Erica and Cassandra. So this is just the beginning of their little romance. But the parts should be coming out, I'm going to say probably every couple of weeks until we get to the last one. Every 2 to 3 weeks, I'm going to give you another part until we get to the last one. And then after that, I will be introducing another short that I've been promoting a little bit called called The Big Date. Another girl on girl story. This is actually a part, the characters in that story are a part of my, I guess you can say a part of my New York series of characters. One of the characters you will recognize from the story Tribeca. I think they're both mentioned in Tribeca in some small way. It's just that one character is more prominently featured in Tribeca than the other. And with that New York series, the characters, you're going to find that they're going to be characters that each have their own little story. And this is going to be one of the stories about 2 of the characters that kind of, well, you'll see how that one plays out. But for tonight, oh, wait, I forgot to mention. Okay, so Secrets is available on Amazon and on Smashwords. I've already posted the Amazon link. You can go to Smashwords and find it. I will get you that link as well. In the meantime, I haven't posted it up to the website yet, but it will be available on the website. The link will be available on the website shortly. This is the website, caseycarterbooks.com. That is caseycarterbooks.com. On the site, you can find a link to all the stories, as well as the video shorts that I've done. So if you can't find them on the website, on the timeline, in my moments, you will be able to find them on the website. Speaking of which, tonight's story. is by Lola Smith, or better known on Twitter as Dr. Lola Smith. And her story is called Made to Measure. Now, last week I kind of teased a little bit because I said it features a fetish, and the fetish is with regards to latex. So when I read the story, you'll see kind of where that goes. But Lola is one of the people in my retweet group, my little author group, and she is from London. She's absolutely lovely. And a little bit about Lola. Lola J. Smith is the author of the Erotica series, genre-bending sci-fi erotic novels that combine elements of raunchy lovemaking with moments of tender intimacy. The Eros trilogy follows the adventures of Lila and Jake after they are selected to test the Eros virtual reality sex machine. Sounds interesting, right? Against all odds, and despite never meeting in the real world, they fall madly in love with each other, something that is strictly forbidden in the rigidly controlled society in which they live. The Eros novels combine love, passion, humor, and a palatable sense of fun and adventure, whilst pushing a whole range of sexual boundaries. A set of short stories is also available for those who just want to read the naughty bits. However, in the author's humble opinion, you would be missing out by not reading the Eros trilogy, which links the raunchy Eros scenarios with an amazing plot set in the futuristic eco-city of Dildopia. Lola combines writing erotic fiction with a high-powered job in a university. She lives in the UK with her husband and her beautiful cat, Martha. If you enjoyed reading any of Lola's books, please take a moment to leave a review on the website where you downloaded it, or contact Lola through her website, or contact Lola on Twitter. Please, after the airing of this, let Lola know how you like her short. Also, I'm only giving you a bit of the story today, so you're going to be forced to buy it to get the whole story. And once I'm done airing, I will also give you the link to where you can buy her stories in general. Because this, like as mentioned in her bio, this is not the only one. But this is the one that she asked me to read, and I did find it kind of naughty enough that I'm not going to give you everything. I'm going to make you buy to hear it all. But as for right now, let's get into Made to Measure by Lola Smith. I'm no mystery. I'm just a simple woman with complex fantasies and fetishes. Quote by Ella Dominguez. I smoothed down my sensible gray skirt, checked my thick woolen tights for wrinkles, took a deep breath, and strode purposefully up the stone staircase leading to my new workplace. The steps curved up towards the front entrance of an imposing Georgian country house. I shivered with nervousness as I wondered what my new house manager would be like, hoping I would make a good first impression on him. This was a second chance for me. I had previously been employed as lady's maid to Lady Camilla Crumpet, wife of the Right Honorable Rupert Crumpet, Esquire. Unfortunately, after an unblemished record of employment with that illustrious family, an intimate dalliance with a gentleman friend of the family resulted in a minor local scandal, leading inexorably to my swift dismissal. I ruefully recalled the incident, remembering Lady Crumpet's shocked expression when she opened the door to the guest room in which we were ensconced. Her mouth dropped open as she took in the scene before her. Admittedly, what she saw must have been a rather shocking view. I was at the time of her entrance, tied face down on the bed, with a gold tasseled curtain tieback, and wearing only my maid's white apron and white cap. The aforementioned gentleman friend had just inserted his very hard and very large penis into my arse, and was thrusting said organ, lubricated with a little lard nicked from the kitchen stores, with great enthusiasm. We were, of course, both rather enjoying this activity, and thus it was probably the combined grunts, moans, and screams emanating from the guest room that had first attracted Lady Crumpet's attention. You may be forgiven for assuming that Lady Crumpet's response was to run tearfully from the room and report the disgraceful occurrence to her equally shocked and outraged husband. Instead, she quietly appraised the scene, entered the room, shut the door firmly behind her, and turned the key in the lock. The click of the door closing alerted my thrusting partner and I to her presence, at which point we both froze, wondering what to do and what her ladyship's next move would be. Astonishingly, after an awkward pause, the lady of the house strode over to the bed and began removing her clothes. Without a word, she made it very apparent that she wanted to participate in our little tableau. And she did so, lustily, noisily, and wholeheartedly. Her ladyship especially enjoyed me fondling and kissing her ample bosom, whilst our mutual gentleman friend, rising to the occasion in more ways than one, applied his tongue to her cunt and anus with astonishing dexterity. You will be wondering, no doubt, why I am therefore unemployed, given that her ladyship most certainly enjoyed our threesome and was highly unlikely to share the details of our little orgy with anyone else. Unfortunately, the noise of the three of us indulging in various acts of indecency with each other attracted the attention of a rather naive scullery maid, who, after listening with her ear to the door for a few minutes, decided someone was being murdered and scuttled off to report what she had heard to the housekeeper, who bustled down the corridor to listen at the door, and being rather less naive than the scullery maid, decided to order one of the more heavily built under-butlers to force open the door with his shoulder, thus revealing to half a dozen servants crowded around the broken door a scenario which involved two scantily clad women and a naked man. The fact that the naked man was vigorously shafting Lady Crumpet's arse whilst I lay underneath her ladyship, fingering and licking her juicy cunt, sealed my fate. I was quickly sent packing with a week's wages in my purse and a letter of recommendation. These two I had negotiated with Lady Crumpet in lieu of me spilling the beans to her devoted husband. However, I digress. After a short period of unemployment, I had secured a slightly inferior post as a housemaid with a family of a more moderate social standing. Today was my first day's service with the Franklin household. I recalled from my letter of appointment that I was to report to the head butler, Mr. Jake Thomas, who would provide me my new uniform and instruct me in my duties. I reached up and rang the doorbell, which set off a dull, distant chiming, and then stood back and waited patiently on the doorstep. After what seemed an interminable length of time, I heard the echo of sharp footsteps on the wooden floor inside. A series of bolts were pulled. A large key rattled in the lock, and finally, the door swung open. Standing before me was a rather attractive, middle-aged man. Although his demeanor seemed rather authoritarian, I sensed that beneath his aloof professional manner, he was kind and decent. The man was dressed impeccably, from his shoes, polished so brightly that I could see my face reflected in them, to his perfectly knotted red bow tie. As I breathed in, I detected a rather pleasant scent of aftershave, shoe polish, and coal tar soap. This was a man who was clearly very particular about cleanliness, and I was sure he would demand very high standards from the staff under his supervision. "Miss Lila Ripley, I presume," he said, to which I meekly nodded my head. "My name is Mr. Thomas. I am head butler and manager of household affairs. Please come inside," he continued, ushering me across the threshold into the gloomy interior. "The first thing we must do is provide you with a uniform. I will then explain the requirements of your new role. I can assure you that we have extremely high standards in the Franklin house, and I will personally ensure that you meet those standards," the head butler informed me rather sternly. I must confess to being somewhat taken aback. It was highly unusual for a head butler to induct an ordinary housemaid, as it was a role usually taken on by the senior housekeeper. I could only infer that either Mr. Thomas was so particular that he felt compelled to take the personal responsibility for maintaining his extremely high standards, or that the Franklin family, being of what somewhat lower standing than my previous employers, didn't have a senior housekeeper in their employ. Regardless, I sensed that I would need to perform my allocated task with particular care and diligence in order to please my new house manager. This caused me a great deal of concern. Despite having worked my way from scullery assistant to lady's maid, my career advancement had rather more to do with my gregarious personality and shapely figure than my aptitude for cleaning and housework. In fact, truth be told, I was rather sloppy and slapdash, and most likely would struggle to meet Mr. Thomas's exacting standards. I reflected that I might need to impress him in other ways to ensure my employment was not terminated rather abruptly. "Please follow me to your room," Mr. Thomas said, before marching off and leading me up several flights of stairs to the top of the house, where I guessed the servants' quarters were located. I listened for signs of activity in the house. It was eerily quiet, and it occurred to me that it was likely that Mr. Franklin and I had the place to ourselves. "The Franklins are currently residing in London for the season," Mr. Thomas informed me. "They have taken most of the staff with them, leaving me to run the household whilst they are away. I've given the remaining staff members the day off, so we won't be disturbed," he continued, confirming my suspicions. It was obvious that Mr. Thomas had engineered the situation thus, and the glint in his blue-gray eyes suggested we would be working together very closely during my induction. I felt a shiver of anticipation run down my spine. Perhaps my rather inadequate cleaning skills would not be too much of an obstacle to my continued employment. After reaching the top floor, Mr. Thomas led me down a long, narrow corridor towards a plain wooden door at the far end. "Here we are," he said briskly. "This is your room. I think you will find it comfortable enough." He took a large bunch of keys attached to his highly polished leather belt, selected a key, and unlocked the door. Then turned the knob and swung the door open, shifting his body slightly, allowing me to pass. My breast, accidentally, brushed against his starch white shirt sleeve as I squeezed past, causing him to take a sharp intake of breath. I lowered my head quickly so that he wouldn't catch the sly smile that fleetingly crossed my lips. "Your uniform is hanging on the wardrobe," he informed me after regaining his composure. "Please put it on. I will return for you in 15 minutes, he said, turning on his heels and closing the bedroom door behind him. The door shut behind me and rattled in its frame slightly as Mr. Thomas withdrew the key from the lock. I surveyed the small room that was to be my new home if I managed to satisfy Mr. Thomas and passed my probationary period. Most of the floor space was occupied by a single bed with a chamber pot placed discreetly underneath. A washstand and jug stood in the corner beside a full-length mirror. The only other furniture was an old wardrobe pushed up against the wall. I knew from my hunch about Mr. John Thomas and his intentions was incorrect when I caught sight of my uniform hanging on the wardrobe door. I walked over to take a closer look, chuckling underneath my breath as I studied the outfit he had obviously taken time and consideration to procure on my behalf. My new uniform comprised of a low-cut black rubber dress, matching rubber gloves, a pair of sheer hold-up stockings with black lace garters, a white lacy apron, cap, and collar, and rather strangely, a pair of black rubber panties. Black stiletto high heels had been neatly placed on the floor in front of the wardrobe. I reached across and touched the rubber dress, feeling its shiny smoothness between my fingers, thinking how it would cling to my body, accentuating my pert breast and drawing attention to my deliciously shaped derriere, which was has been described as extremely peachy by my gentlemen admirers. I was conscious that time was passing as I perused my new uniform, and that Mr. Thomas would return shortly, expecting me to be dressed and ready for my induction. I quickly undressed, glancing at my body in the mirror as I did so. The black lacy underwear I wore beneath my sensible outer clothing seemed rather incongruous given my surroundings and lowly status. Despite any inferior position in society, I had vowed that I would always wear pretty undergarments, and over the years had purloined scanty and expensive brasiers and panties from several of my former mistresses. They never noticed that several of their sauciest items of lingerie had gone missing, having more than enough money to easily replace them. In several instances, where my mistress rarely slept with the master of the house, the items in question were, in my opinion, quite frankly, rather redundant. So I liberated them and made sure they were used to spice up various dalliances with footmen, an under butler, a head gardener, and occasionally, when the mood struck me, my fellow housemaids. I slipped off my lacy brassiere and panties and stood naked in front of the mirror, shivering slightly in the cool air. Aware that I was in no position to complain about the peculiarities of my new uniform, I removed the pair of black rubber panties from the hanger. On close inspection, I was shocked to discover a large, neatly cut hole in the crotch. It had been deliberately made and was clearly intended to leave my lady bits exposed. How delightfully wicked and naughty. It seemed Mr. Thomas had already considered the practicalities of my new role. After a moment's hesitation, I stepped into the panties and pulled them up my thighs and over my bottom. The stretchy material clung to the rounded contours of my pert posterior like a curvaceous black sheath. As I guessed, the strategically positioned hole left nothing to the imagination, revealing a small tuft of pubic hair in front of the cleft between my buttocks at the rear. I pulled on the rubber dress next, wiggling to adjust the tight-fitting garment before zipping it up the front, smoothing down the creases, and adjusting the cleavage so my tits were nicely displayed. Turning to look at myself in the mirror, I nodded with approval. Mr. Thomas had chosen well. The rubber dress was a perfect fit, although, of course, totally inappropriate as a maid's uniform. I added the finishing touches, pulling on the sheer black stockings, fastening the apron around my waist, tying the lace collar around my neck, and then slipping on the lovely but rather impractical high-heeled shoes. I pulled on the rubber gloves and sat down on the bed, waiting nervously for Mr. Thomas to return. Soon, I heard the sound of Mr. Thomas in the corridor outside. There was a pause and then a sharp precision rap on the door. I tottered over across the room, slightly unsteady in my high heels, and flung the door open with more than a hint of insolence. I certainly didn't want to make things easy for my new house manager. Mr. Thomas stepped back as I stood, hand on my hips, legs slightly apart, and stared at him with an air of saucy defiance. His eyes traveled the length of my body, taking in the black high-heeled shoes, stockings, tight-fitting rubber dress, and the slinky black rubber gloves. He opened his mouth slightly and wetted his lips. I could see his chest rising and falling as his breathing quickened with desire. Your new uniform appears to fit rather nicely, he suggested after finishing his appraisal. It doesn't seem particularly appropriate for housework, though, I responded tartly. On the contrary, he replied sharply, it is completely in keeping with the demands and expectations of your new role. Now let's begin your induction and put you through your paces. I'm looking forward to finding out whether your skills are indeed as exceptional as rumor suggests." He turned abruptly, beckoning me to follow him, and set off at a brisk pace along the corridor and back down the staircase to the ground floor. I followed best as I could, finding his rapid pace rather difficult to keep up with, due largely to my high heels and constraining hem of the tight-fitting rubber dress. I was about to ask Mr. Thomas, rather petulantly, to slow down when he finally stopped and swung open the door leading to the formal dining room. I followed him inside and took stock of my new surroundings. The room was beautifully appointed, with a large, highly polished dining table surrounded by 12 elegantly upholstered wooden chairs at one end, and an informal sitting area with a chaise lounge, 2 comfortable armchairs, and a footstool with elaborately carved legs at the other. Several oil paintings of stern-looking gentlemen and haughty women hung from the walls, whom I presumed were the Franklin family ancestors. A highly polished sideboard stood imposingly against the wall. My eyes widened as I saw an array of objects that had been placed on top of it. There was a blue feather duster with a short stubby handle, a brush and dustpan. On the floor next to it, a long-handled mop and a shiny steel bucket filled with soapy water. And next to that, one of those new-fangled vacuum devices. It was a rather dismaying sight, indicating that Mr. Thomas did indeed wish to test my cleaning skills. He beckoned me across to the sideboard. As I got closer, I noticed 2 other items I hadn't seen on my first inspection. A pile of rope lay neatly coiled on the carpet in front of the dresser, and displayed on a shelf was a particular black rubber phallus-shaped ornament that looked suspiciously like a butt plug. Mr. Thomas smiled at my bemused expression with a cheeky sparkle in his blue-gray eyes. Although pretending to be shocked, I was rather relieved, as I knew that my rather paltry housemaid skills would not be sufficient to retain me for long in this establishment. I also knew that my other attributes would more than make up for my lack of enthusiasm and talent in the cleaning department. I stood in front of the dresser, my palm resting on its polished wooden surface, and reflected that someone was obviously very thorough with their dusting. "I want to see how you handle a vacuum cleaner," Mr. Thomas said, motioning me to start vacuuming the large Persian rug in front of the dresser. I must confess to being rather surprised. Did Mr. Thomas really expect me to start doing housework in my rubber dress? It was, in my opinion, much more suited to a bordello specializing in outlandish fetishes rather than the genteel surroundings of the Franklin household. I turned my attention to the odd mechanical device, taking hold of the handle and making a feeble attempt to push it. Indeed, I wasn't quite sure how it worked. As I have mentioned, my cleaning skills were rather limited. Mr. Thomas tutted loudly and came to stand next to me. He reached around my body, taking the opportunity to brush the back of his hand against the rubber dress stretched taut over my pert bottom. He was close enough for me to feel his warm breath against my neck. "You have to turn it on like this," he explained, pointing to a small switch on the handle. "But I can see your aptitude with a vacuum. It leaves a lot to be desired," he decided. "Let's see how you handle a mop." Needless to say, my mopping action was similarly lacking, and after observing my ineptitude for a couple of minutes, Mr. Thomas sighed, removed the mop from my hand, and looked at me with a quizzical expression. "Shall we see if we can find out what you are good at?" he suggested with a hint of exasperation. Mr. Thomas beckoned me to follow as he strode over to a step chair standing next to a beautiful old grandfather clock. He deftly unfolded the chair, converting it into a small step ladder. "Dust the clock, please, starting at the top," the head butler instructed, passing me the short-handled feather duster from the sideboard. I stepped up onto the stepladder, wobbling precariously in my high heels and tight-fitting rubber dress, and began tentatively dusting the antique clock face. Already struggling to maintain my balance, I started violently when I felt a roving hand gliding over my rubber panties and venturing furtively between my stocking-clad thighs. "Just holding you steady," the head butler murmured. "Are you really sure that's necessary, Mr. Thomas?" I half-heartedly queried. "We follow very strict health and safety procedures in the Franklin household. I wouldn't want you to fall and injure yourself," the head butler suavely explained whilst blatantly fondling my bottom. Then, even more shockingly, he ran his finger lightly over my exposed labia as I ineffectively wafted the feather duster through the air. His supple, wandering fingers were distracting me from my work, making it more likely that I would topple from the stepladder. My legs quivered with excitement when Mr. Thomas prized open my labia lips and began delicately stroking my clitoris. It required a great deal of self-control to hold myself steady and continue the dusting of the clock in the face of such intimate provocation. Thankfully, Mr. Thomas finally relented and instructed me to climb down from the stepladder and relinquished the feather duster before I had a nasty accident. Mr. Thomas studied my flushed features as I clumsily clambered off the ladder and smoothed down my rubber dress. Then, much to my surprise, he reached forward and pulled up the dress with a loud snap, exposing my rubber panties. My tiny bush of pubic hair, neatly trimmed into an exclamation mark, was clearly visible through the strategically positioned hold, like some impudent furry little mammal. Mr. Thomas looked me straight in the eye, challenging me to respond to his gross breach of etiquette. I was unable to meet his gaze and lowered my head in a gesture of meek submission. Finding no resistance to his extremely presumptuous behavior, Mr. Thomas began caressing my latex-sheathed breast, gently squeezing and massaging them through the flexible material. Then his fingers moved down over my stomach, tracing a line across my rubber panties towards the gaping hole where the crotch ought to be. Exploiting the garment maker's deliberate design flaw, Mr. Thomas brushed his hand lightly over my pubic mound, then slid it unerringly between my thighs. I felt his strong fingers prise open my labia, revealing the fleshy little pearl hidden within its folds and my hot, sticky fissure. He began stroking me, sending shivers of tingling ecstasy coursing through my body. Then his index finger moved lower, rubbing my lips, causing them to slowly open like a door in a secret passage. Unsurprisingly, I was already very wet, and the head butler's fingers slipped easily inside me. My well-lubricated pussy, which has been described as hot and juicy by former lovers, was renowned for its slippery wetness. The fact that I was usually dripping wet was to me an indication of how much I enjoy sexual intercourse. I moaned with pleasure as Mr. Thomas slipped another finger inside my cunt and began to vigorously masturbate me. Leaning back, I braced myself against the sideboard, allowing Mr. Thomas to have his wicked way, willing him to push his fingers deeper. We stared hard into each other's eyes, both breathing heavily as lust and desire overcame us. The head butler suddenly withdrew his glistening fingers from my sodden cunt, and much to my surprise, replaced them with the handle of the feather duster, pushing it deep inside me, filling me up. I gasped in shock at the unexpected incursion of the unusual object. "I will make you polish the furniture like this if you are disobedient," he warned me. Despite me being impaled on a household cleaning implement, I burst into a fit of giggles at this ridiculous suggestion. He chuckled briefly, then slowly pulled out the feather duster and licked my juice off the handle, staring intently into my eyes as he did so. "Delicious," he declared with a mischievous grin on his face. Placing his hand on my shoulder, Mr. Thomas gently but firmly pushed me down until I was kneeling on the floor. He placed the feather duster on top of the sideboard and picked up the dustpan and brush. My heart sank. Surely he wasn't going to make me do more cleaning, just when things were starting to get interesting. "Get down on your hands and knees, Miss Ripley," the head butler commanded me. I instantly complied with his instruction, despite the undignified and vulnerable position it placed me in. Instead of handing me the cleaning tools, he smacked my bottom several times with the brush. I yelped with indignation and looked up, shocked and bemused, my rear end smarting from the unexpected punishment. "That will help you understand who was in charge here, Miss Ripley," he stated firmly, the ghost of a smile fleeting across his lips. I shuffled around on my knees so that I was face to face with the head butler's groin. "Of course you're in charge, Mr. Thomas," I murmured as I began quickly unbuttoning his trousers. I reached inside and was delighted to discover his hard shaft straining to be released. Knowing my way around a gentleman's undergarments from plenty of experience, I deftly freed the head butler's cock from captivity and then leaned forward to take it in my mouth. I'd show him who was major domo, I thought. He'd soon realize who was in charge around here, especially when I gave him the opportunity to enjoy the strap-on dildo packed inside my battered leathered suitcase. I was rather partial to taking on the dominant role during sexual intercourse and enjoyed strapping on the dildo and pleasuring my lovers. Mr. Thomas would find out about my naughty little peccadillo some other time. Right now, I had to concentrate on the task before me. I slid my tongue down the length of his shaft, licking and kissing as I went, then once more took him in my mouth, sucking hard as I slowly moved my head backwards and forwards. Taking a moment to glance upwards, I saw with satisfaction that my expert ministrations were beginning to have the desired effect. Mr. Thomas's eyes were closed, and his breathing was shallow, rapid breaths as I sucked his engorged member. Judging from his groans, he had completely forgot about dusting and cleaning for the time being. Suddenly, Mr. Thomas pulled backwards, withdrawing his penis from my mouth, taking me rather by surprise. Such was my excellent oral technique that once a gentleman's cock entered my mouth, it didn't leave until I decided it should do so. Usually, after the aforesaid gentleman had deposited a large, creamy load of spunk down the back of my throat. Mr. Thomas took advantage of my confusion by grasping my hands and pulling me to my feet. He stooped down to pick up the coil of rope and then pushed me across the room towards the footstool. With one hand on my shoulder and the other guiding me from behind, Mr. Thomas forced me to kneel in front of the stool. I didn't resist as he pushed me down on top of it, draping my body over the upholstered fabric cushion. Then he clasped my hands together and tied them behind my back. I didn't struggle as he threaded the ends of the rope underneath the footstool, wrapped them around my torso several times. Mr. Thomas used the remaining length of rope to bind my thighs to the ornately carved wooden legs. I was left immobilized, with legs spread akimbo and my head hanging down over the end of the footstool. My magnanimous treatment continued as Mr. Thomas peeled my tight-fitting dress over my back with a flourish, leaving my cunt and anus completely exposed through the large hole in the rubber panties. I guessed what was coming next and shivered with anticipation, wondering what object or part of Mr. Thomas's anatomy would be inserted into my willing orifices. As I waited impatiently for that inevitable occurrence, I reflected that this was proving to be a most pleasant first day at work. And that is where I leave you in the delightful Made to Measure. You're going to have to buy Lola's little short here to find out what happens next to our little saucy maid in her rubber outfit. So, thank you for enjoying Lola Smith's Made to Measure. Let me say thank you, Dr. Lola, for letting me read your short and getting folks all riled up before they go to bed. Quite possibly, if you got an apron, you might want to pull it out. I'm just saying. Just the apron, the high heels, might be a little something. Get your little feather duster. You don't have to insert it, but get your little feather duster. Just make it look good when you tip into the room is all I'm saying. But speaking of all of that, that's one of the things I like about this story is while this woman is a maid and her day consists of wearing the maid's outfit, thank you, Lorenzo. What's really neat about this is for those of us who say aren't necessarily into the kinky stuff on a regular basis, but every now and then want to do a little something different, pull out the apron if you got one, or fake an apron. Take your partner's shirt and tie it around your waist like it's an apron, and come in and maybe just your bra and some high heels and a little feather duster, or as I suggest in Tie Me Up, pull out that vacuum cleaner, clean that sucker out, and let's just see how much action you can get off that vacuum cleaner. Yes, I am suggesting you use your vacuum cleaner. I'm also saying clean it first. Clean it. However, I don't know, you might like that suction action. But this is a great example of how you can take the full-on fetish concept and kind of scale it down to your everyday sort of vanilla lifestyle. It's worth a change, you know? I mean, that's, I think, part of what keeps the romance and the sex sexy is doing something different. If you do it the same way every single time, same time of the day, same place in the house or wherever, it can become kind of monotonous. And yeah, you may enjoy it because our bodies were built to enjoy it. But I promise you, if you do something a little different from time to time, you're going to enjoy it a lot more. So again, thank you to Dr. Lola for Made to Measure. As soon as we're done, I'm going to post up the link. I'm going to post up the video. And you can get your copy of Made to Measure so that you can finish the story and find out what happens next. And in the meantime, next week's story is by Rico Knight. Now, of course, this is his Twitter handle, Night Moves, but Rico Knight. And his story is called Three Brides for One Brother. Again, this story is going to give you a little peek into fetishes. I guess maybe I must be attracting fetishes, because when I think about it, most of the stories that I've read contained a fetish of some kind, whether it's role play, whether it's domination, in this case the latex, the rubber. Night Moves is also going to reiterate a fetish, and if you recall one of the other stories, the naughty neighbor's back door fetish, the attraction to Asian women, and Naughty Moves is going to explore that as well as a few other concepts. Coming up in the future, I will be bringing the Casey at Night to Instagram, and this is me on Instagram, the Casey Carter Experience. So if you're on Instagram, start following me now. This summer, I will be bringing Casey at Night to Instagram. It'll be kind of pretty much like this, but I'm gonna see if I might do a little bit more out there. But we'll see. We're gonna get it started for the Instagram audience, get them caught up to where you guys already are. And if you're watching me on Periscope, this is who I am on Periscope and Twitter. Read Casey Carter. So if you're not following me on Twitter, please follow on Twitter. And like I said, on both Periscope and Twitter, I'm at Read Casey Carter. Let me see. What else do I have to remember here? Oh, and again, this week I just released Secrets, first installment. I kind of did it on the slide because I had not been using Smashwords before, and I just wanted to make sure I got it all loaded up properly. So over the next week or so, I will be doing a bigger promotions for it. But as of right now, Secrets, the first in my Blue series of stories, and we're gonna, as I mentioned before, we're gonna talk about what all of that means as it relates to the sexual rainbow. And let's see if I can do that real quick for you, because it's the, as I've said on many occasions, the way I do my stories, they're all going to have somewhat of a theme in terms of the intensity of the story. You'll be able to figure out what kind of story it is, say, based on the color of the cover. So if you're not into the fetish stuff, the BDSM, the more extreme, then you don't want to necessarily read a black or a red. Although the red, not going to be as hardcore as, say, a black story, but it's going to take you there. It's definitely going to take you there. Now, Blue, and I'm trying to find it for you. Blue is going to be a little less intense. So if you're Blue, you're a wonderful sex partner. You are affectionate and sensitive and consider lovemaking a fine art. Your passion is more like a tidal wave than a fiery aggression. Blues are the best mates since they never seek outside interest. So stark contrast to the reds and the blacks, which I have to admit most of my stories are. But I want to kind of give you a feel for what it's the difference in the range. Now, the big date, which will be out this summer, probably late June, early July, that story will have an orange cover. And Orange says you enjoy concocting sexual fantasies with the sex as a dramatic one-act play in which you are the star. Foreplay is just as important to you as sexual intercourse. Despite it all, you often don't experience orgasm, but you'll put on a good act. You can be violent during sex. Men tend to pull their partner's hair, while women are known for leaving whelps on their partner's back. So a little bit between, say, that red experience and that blue experience. And you'll see the slight difference. For some, it's not going to seem any different. But if you're paying attention, if you've read my other stories, you will catch the difference. So, currently available, the first installments of Secrets, available on Amazon and Smashwords. There will be an additional 2, maybe 3 installments on that. And then I will be bringing you the big date, all of which are girl on girl, which is a new thing for me. So, let's see. Oh, okay. So I got a email from someone who had gone to my website, and they're from this company that does personal lubricants. And I wanted to, I set the request and said that I would love to try their product and would talk about it on the show. So they were kind enough to send me some samples. And I have to admit, they are full-size samples. Love that. Love that. So this one is an all-over pleasure oil. And what's really cool about this is that it's all natural. No preservatives, no parabens, no nasties. And they say it's a 4-in-1 pleasure oil, a sensual lubricant, intimate body massage oil, nourishing body massage moisturizer, and luxurious bath oil. What caught my attention about this, aside from its all natural aspect, infused with natural aphrodisiacs. I want to know if that actually makes a difference. Because, for example, animals give off pheromones when they're in heat. We supposedly give off pheromones. I want to see if using a product that says it's got aphrodisiacs, pheromones, or what have you makes a difference. I want to see if I don't know. I mean, if you're accustomed to having good sex on a regular basis, I don't know that you would notice a difference, but I want to find out. And then this is what they're calling a warming arousal oil. And it says just 2 drops away from pure pleasure. So I'm gonna let you know whether or not 2 drops does the job and what that actually is like. I don't know if anybody's ever used a warming oil, but it is a very interesting sensation. You actually do feel the heat of a buildup. But again, this is 100% all natural. The product is made in Australia, but if I remember correctly, it's distributed out of the US. So, wonderful gentleman by the name of Dave sent me these, and I'll let you know next week if I liked them and what I recommend them. So again, Wildfire. I will next week. I'll post up the website and give you my personal opinion of the product. Okay, so thus ends our time together for this week. I want to again thank Dr. Lola for letting me share her wonderful little story. I want to thank Luscious Lee for letting me share her story last week. And I want to thank Rico Knight for letting me share his story this coming Wednesday. In the meantime, people, I want you to pull out your apron and feather duster, slip into them high heels, and have a naughty night of your own. As I like to always say, I love you like a fat kid loves cake. Bye.